people trust deadbolts. They slide the solid brass mechanism into place, hear the firm click, and fall asleep, believing the metal will keep the wolves out. But a lock only works if the monster isn't already sitting across from you at the dinner table. Snow crunches beneath Dave Miller's insulated work boots. The rhythmic blinking of a neighbour's plastic Santa casts chaotic red and green shadows against the frost-covered siding of 14 Elm Street. Mid-December usually brings a certain frenetic energy to Oak Haven, Ohio. Yet, this particular single-story ranch house remains entirely dormant. 2 full days have passed without a single interior bulb switching on. No exhaust drifts from the brick chimney. Unopened envelopes overflow the rusted metal mailbox beside the front entrance. Peeking through the living room window yields nothing but unyielding blackness. Dave presses his bare palm against the freezing glass, shielding his eyes to cut the street lamp glare. A subtle, sickly sweet odour leaks through the warped wooden frame. It doesn't smell like Martha Vance's famous cinnamon pastries. This scent carries the sharp, metallic sting of old coins mixed with spoiled meat. He checks the front knob, locked tight. Moving around to the side alley, the old Marine finds the exact same resistance. All deadbolts are engaged from within. Acid churns deep in his gut. Tom Vance relies on an oxygen tank and a wheelchair. Martha never misses her morning shift at the local farmer's market. Sarah, their recently divorced daughter, should be grading elementary school art projects by the fireplace, while her 2 kids visit their grandparents. Desperation forces Dave's hand. He grabs a heavy tire iron from his truck bed and wedges it between the side door and the jamb. Wood splinters with a deafening crack, echoing through the empty driveway. The hinges give way, releasing a wave of trapped, stagnant heat. Inside, the silence feels absolute, broken only by the sporadic hiss of a baseboard radiator. A singular beam of yellow illumination slices across the hallway hardwood, highlighting a smear of dark, crusted fluid. It forms an unnatural, sweeping arc, leading directly toward the stairs. Step by agonizing step, he ventures into the suffocating gloom. The copper stench becomes overpowering, coating the back of his throat like grease. He reaches the threshold of the upstairs guest room. A knocked-over floor lamp lies near the foot of the mattress. Sarah rests partially on the carpet. Her limbs are splayed at impossible angles, joints contorted, as if she had been discarded like a broken marionette. Beside the wall, a heavy oak table leg leans against the baseboard, its polished surface marred by matted hair and drying black patches. Across the narrow hall, the master bedroom door sits lightly ajar. Martha is slumped over the mattress edge. A grey electrical extension cord binds her neck, biting so deeply into the skin that the plastic wire disappears entirely into the swollen tissue. Her eyes are wide open, staring blankly at the motionless ceiling fan. Downstairs in the den, Tom remains in his medical bed. The Vietnam veteran's frail body lies unnaturally still beneath a festive, red plaid blanket. Another thick cable wraps tightly around his throat, crossing violently over his mouth. Whoever did this didn't just end his life. They ensured he couldn't even whisper for help. The television in the corner remains powered off. In stark contrast to the butchery, a half-empty glass of water sits undisturbed on the nightstand. Dave stumbles backward. His boots slide against the tacky floorboards. Breath hitches painfully, scraping the inside of his lungs. Bile rises rapidly in his esophagus. He turns, blindly scrambling toward the shattered side entrance, bursting out into the biting Ohio night. Dropping to his knees in the powdery snow, he violently empties his stomach. Trembling fingers fumble frantically in his heavy coat pocket, desperately searching for his cell phone. Roast beef and cinnamon. 48 hours before Dave Miller vomited in the driveway snow, those were the only scents drifting through 14 Elm Street. Friday evening meant a rare occasion for the Vance household. Silverware clinked against porcelain plates. masking the steady, mechanical hum of Tom's oxygen concentrator. Sarah had spent the entire afternoon preparing the dining room, meticulously smoothing out the wrinkles in a white lace tablecloth. She wanted everything flawless. After a bitter divorce left her navigating single motherhood, the elementary school teacher finally thought she had found a secure anchor. His name was Derek Lowe. He sat across from the disabled veteran, nursing a glass of iced tea with eerily steady hands. 7 months prior, this exact man had been staring at the concrete walls of a Michigan penitentiary cell. Tonight, he wore a freshly ironed button-down shirt, flashing a practiced, disarming smile at Martha whenever she offered second helpings of potatoes. To a lonely woman desperate for affection, he looked like redemption. Through a predator's eyes, the Vance residence resembled an unlocked, unguarded vault. The elderly patriarch was permanently tethered to a medical bed. The mother possessed only the physical strength to bake pastries. 2 young children were, conveniently, miles away at their grandparents' house, removing any unpredictable variables from the equation. Dinner concluded shortly after 8 o'clock. Floorboards groaned softly underfoot as Sarah led her new boyfriend up the narrow, carpeted staircase. Her bedroom doubled as an art studio, cluttered with half-finished watercolor paintings and tall stacks of graded homework assignments. Strands of colored holiday bulbs blinked merrily around the window frame, casting a warm, rhythmic glow across the faded floral wallpaper. She turned her back to the doorway, reaching toward a small framed photograph on the oak dresser to proudly show him her kids. The temperature in the room didn't drop. No warning bells rang in her intuition. Reality simply fractured without a single prelude. Resting against the baseboard near the closet was a detached, solid, oak table leg, waiting patiently to be re-glued to a vintage writing desk. Derek's long fingers wrapped around the polished cylinder. Calluses scraped against the smooth wood grain as he lifted the makeshift club. He didn't hesitate, didn't utter a final word of apology, and certainly didn't close his eyes. Hard timber met fragile skull with a sickening, wet snap. It sounded exactly like a heavy baseball bat striking an overripe melon. The immense kinetic impact instantly shattered the parietal bone, immediately severing the brain's ability to process pain or vocalize fear. Sarah never produced a scream. Her knees buckled outward as all motor function ceased simultaneously. Lungs instantly emptied of their held breath, emitting a sharp, guttural wheeze as she collapsed heavily onto the synthetic carpet fibers. Dark, viscous fluid immediately began pouring from the massive blunt force laceration, expanding into an irregular, creeping halo around her ruined head. Standing over the motionless art teacher, the ex-convict displayed zero signs of panic. Adrenaline did not make his hands shake or his skin sweat. Instead, his breathing remained perfectly even, chest rising and falling in a slow, calculated tempo. A single, heavy drop of crimson slipped from the blunt end of the oak weapon, splattering onto the toe of his brown leather shoe. He simply tilted his chin upward, listening intensely to the acoustic shifts in the house. Downstairs, the distinct squeak of orthopedic rubber-soled shoes echoed from the kitchen linoleum. Martha had heard the heavy thud. Slow, deliberate footsteps began to ascend the wooden stairs, one tread at a time, approaching the second-floor landing with maternal concern. Gripping the bloodied table leg tighter, Derek stepped out of the bedroom and faded into the dark hallway shadows, pressing his spine completely flat against the cold drywall. He waited in total silence by the top step, consumed by the dead calm patience of a spider sensing fresh vibrations on its web. Rubber soles squeak violently against varnished oak, a sound entirely too heavy for the narrow architecture of the older home. Martha's hand grips the wooden banister, her knuckles turning white with sudden maternal worry. She genuinely expects to find a fallen bookshelf or a dropped piece of heavy luggage. Instead, the upstairs shadows swallow her completely. Stepping fluidly from the blind spot behind the bedroom doorframe, Derek does not utter a single syllable. The solid oak table leg arcs downward through the dim light. Cracking bone mimics the snap of a dry winter branch. Her defensive reflexes never even register the threat. Gravity takes over, dropping her limp frame onto the edge of the guest mattress. Reaching into a nearby utility drawer, his fingers brush past stray batteries to find a thick grey extension cord. Pliant plastic bites deep into yielding throat tissue. Resistance lasts mere seconds before her pupils dilate, freezing to stare blankly at the motionless blades of the ceiling fan above. Crimson fluid races down the polished grain of the makeshift weapon, pattering softly onto the synthetic carpet fibers. The ex-convict casually discards the heavy lumber against the baseboard. Descending the staircase requires a relaxed, perfectly even stride. Small red flecks now decorate his freshly ironed collar, yet, beneath his ribs, his heart beats at an absolute resting rate. Normal men would collapse to their knees to vomit. Panicked amateurs would sprint out the front door into the biting Ohio winter wind. This predator simply wipes a smudge from his cheek and walks into the den. Rhythmic, mechanical hissing dominates the ground floor as the oxygen concentrator pumps medical-grade air into Tom Vance's failing lungs. The paralyzed Vietnam veteran shifts weakly under a festive red plaid blanket, blinking against the harsh glare of a late-night television broadcast. A tall silhouette crosses the glowing screen. Taking a seat in the floral armchair beside the adjustable bed, the intruder crosses his legs. Polite conversation begins. Law enforcement will never know the exact dialogue exchanged in that claustrophobic space. Perhaps the old soldier asked where his wife had gone. Maybe the killer offered a reassuring lie about a clumsy accident involving a spilled glass of water upstairs. The sheer psychological terror resides in the agonizing delay. A murderer sitting patiently, making small talk about the weather, while the listener's family bleeds out through the floor joists directly above his head. Chatter eventually ceases. Standing up from the armchair, the house guest unwinds another length of industrial electrical cabling from a nearby portable space heater. Frail, liver-spotted hands attempt to push the heavy wool bedding away. It is an entirely futile gesture. Calloused fingers loop the rigid wire around the pensioner's wrinkled neck, pulling it brutally across his lips to stifle any final, desperate gasp. The physical struggle is mercifully brief. Machinery continues to hum in the corner, dutifully delivering purified air through plastic tubes to a man who can no longer draw a breath. Copper plumbing rattles deep within the drywall. Steam billows from the hallway bathroom, carrying the harsh chemical scent of cheap bar soap and metallic decay. Standing under the scalding shower spray, the executioner watches pink-tinged suds swirl lazily down the porcelain drain. Toweling off his wet hair, he doesn't bother searching for his own ruined garments. Fabric rustles as he opens the master closet, sliding his muscular arms into Tom's favorite flannel shirt. The tailored fit is slightly loose on his frame. Wandering back into the living room, the sociopath completely ignores the butchery surrounding him. Slipping the brass deadbolts into their locked positions, he shuts off the remaining lamps and lies down heavily on the sofa. Within minutes, a steady, rhythmic snoring joins the mechanical hiss of the medical equipment. How deeply must a human soul be fractured to slaughter 3 innocent people, steal an old man's clothes, and drift into a peaceful slumber while the blood cools in the very next room? Sunlight, filtering through the frosted windows of 14 Elm Street, reveals a stark, unforgiving reality. Dust motes dance lazily over the drying, blackened pools staining the hardwood floorboards. Derek Lowe wakes up entirely refreshed. He stretches his muscular arms, still wearing the dead man's oversized flannel shirt, completely undisturbed by the 3 corpses resting violently in the adjacent rooms. Most perpetrators would be sprinting across county lines by dawn, fueled by raw panic. This specific predator decides to brew a fresh pot of Folgers coffee. Porcelain clinks against the granite countertop as he pours a steaming mug. The sickly sweet odor of copper and bowel release permeates the kitchen, violently clashing with the artificial scent of Martha's cinnamon holiday candles. Keys to the family's silver Honda Civic jingle rhythmically in his denim pocket. Stepping out into the crisp Ohio morning, the sociopath exhales a long cloud of white vapor. He slides seamlessly into the driver's seat, adjusting the rearview mirror with steady, uncalloused hands. The 4-cylinder engine turns over, flawlessly. A short drive brings him to the local Oakhaven hardware store. Fluorescent tubes hum loudly overhead as his heavy boots click down the stained concrete aisles. Passing cheerful rows of discounted Christmas lights, his dark focus narrows purely on agricultural utility. 2 heavy-duty steel shovels and a forged iron pickaxe find their way to the checkout counter. The teenage cashier barely glances up from her smartphone, scanning the barcodes with a monotonous electronic beep. Derek hands over crumpled $20 bills pulled directly from Martha Vance's floral leather wallet. Metal clanks loudly in the trunk of the sedan a few moments later. His internal blueprint is ruthlessly pragmatic. 4 shallow trenches dug deep into the frozen soil of the Municipal Woodland Reserve just outside town boundaries. Returning to the suburban house, he parks neatly in the icy driveway. Gripping the steering wheel, he sits in silence, fully intending to drag the stiffening, ruined bodies out into the trunk under the cover of nightfall. By late afternoon, however, the neighborhood ecosystem begins to actively reject the anomaly. Shadows stretch unnaturally long across the snow-covered lawns. Dave Miller, the elderly Marine next door, finishes salting his walkway and pauses near the property line. No warm exhaust drifts from Tom's brick chimney. Unopened envelopes are spilling out of the rusted mailbox. Peering closely through the chain-link fence, the veteran observes the parked Honda. Its tires are caked in fresh, dark forest mud that absolutely does not match the clean, paved driveway. Survival intuition, forged in foreign jungles decades ago, screams that something is fundamentally broken next door. Whispers start echoing softly between the adjacent properties as neighbors notice the drawn blinds. Cell phones are finally dialed. Watching coldly through a narrow slit in the living room curtains, the intruder registers the shifting suburban dynamics. Distant sirens begin a low, mournful wail. Flashing red and blue lights suddenly turn onto the far end of Elm Street, reflecting intensely off the frosted windshields of parked cars. The predator's internal calculus instantly changes. Abandoning the ambitious mass grave protocol, he quickly grabs Sarah's stolen laptop, shoving it into a canvas duffel bag alongside his own meager belongings. Escaping through the rear patio slider just as heavy, authoritative fists begin pounding violently on the front wooden entrance. The killer completely evades the initial sweep. Leaving the slaughtered family locked inside their own silent tomb, Derek vanishes into the encroaching dusk, accelerating the stolen Civic toward the state line. But when you are carrying the psychological weight of 3 butchered souls, how far can you really run before the ghosts catch up? Digital timestamps flicker violently across the bottom of a blurry surveillance monitor. Green pixelated numbers read precisely 8:14 p.m. on the night of the slaughter, locking Sarah's ex-husband securely inside a gas station 40 miles away from the Elm Street residence. A fatigued detective exhales a harsh breath, tasting the bitter, acidic dregs of day-old breakroom coffee. Initial investigative instincts almost always drift toward the disgruntled former spouse. Police procedure demands ruling out the obvious before hunting the obscure. Clearing the ex-husband forcefully shifted the crosshairs toward an entirely new, deeply unstable variable. The charming parolee from Michigan, a man who had just embedded himself into a vulnerable family unit under the guise of romantic salvation. Neon pink light bleeds through the cracked, yellowed plastic blinds of room 114 at the rusted Starlight Motor Inn. Interstate semi-trucks hum a relentless, low-frequency vibration just beyond the parking lot perimeter. At exactly 2:14 a.m., heavily armored boots step deliberately over salt-stained asphalt, avoiding the frozen puddles, reflecting the flashing cruiser lights. A 40-pound steel battering ram meets the cheap hollow core door. Wood splinters outward in a singular, deafening explosion of composite material and sheared screws. Tactical flashlight beams immediately slice through the heavy haze of stale tobacco smoke, pinning a solitary figure against the rumpled, cigarette-burned bedspread. Derek Lowe does not scramble for a hidden firearm. He doesn't even raise his hands to shield his vision. The ex-convict merely sits up slowly, his resting pulse remaining at a completely undisturbed 60 beats per minute, while laser sights dance across his chest. Harsh fluorescent tubes buzz like dying hornets inside interview room B. Stainless steel handcuffs clink rhythmically against the bolted metal table, providing the only acoustic interruption in the otherwise dead calm environment. Sitting directly opposite two seasoned homicide detectives, the suspect presents an absolute void of normal physiological responses. No microscopic beads of nervous sweat gather along his hairline. His pupils remain fixed, dark, and utterly unreadable. When presented with photographs of the silver Honda Civic parked outside the motel, and the stolen electronics shoved hastily into his canvas duffel bag, the killer's jawline refuses to tighten. Leaning forward slightly, the predator casually spins a fabricated narrative. He claims the computer was a prearranged purchase, explaining away the tiny flecks of arterial spray on his leather boots as a clumsy accident from a nosebleed. True evil rarely foams at the mouth or screams in maniacal rage. It wears a polite, disarming smile and speaks in a measured, exceptionally reasonable cadence, while looking directly into the camera lens. Solid oak strikes a mahogany block 12 months later, echoing loudly through the county courthouse to finalize a state-mandated death sentence. Ohio legal frameworks function on sterile, calculated procedures, effectively closing the administrative file. Judicial decrees, however, possess absolutely zero power to scrub the lingering psychic rot from a physical location. Winter eventually surrenders to a damp, grey spring back on Elm Street. Number 14 stands entirely vacant, resembling a hollowed-out skull. The shattered side entrance, where a frantic neighbour first breached the perimeter, is now sealed by a thick sheet of unpainted plywood. Overgrown weeds systematically strangle the once manicured flower beds, creeping relentlessly up the brick foundation. Yet, every single evening just before dusk fully swallows the neighbourhood, an elderly Marine limps slowly across the shared property line. Dave Miller drags a stiff-bristled push broom across the concrete driveway, meticulously clearing away accumulated fallen leaves from the exact coordinates where he emptied his stomach on that freezing December night. Reaching up with severely arthritic fingers, the old soldier firmly flips the switch for the exterior porch lamp. Amber illumination pushes back the creeping darkness, casting a warm, solitary glow over an empty driveway. Society desperately wants to believe that monsters announce themselves with bared fangs, or ominous, echoing footsteps in the distance. The ultimate tragedy of the Vance family proves a far more insidious reality. Predators usually arrive carrying a polite bottle of dinner wine, wearing a freshly pressed shirt, and waiting patiently for you to lock the front door yourself.